So, I got early access to Linnea, and I don't know what she's feeding Lumi with, because she hits like a truck. Not only that, but the new and shiny Binea core now pulls out old Geo units out of the gutter and makes them feel good again. And yet, despite all of this, there are a few crucial mistakes you need to avoid when using Linnea. So even if her kit is quite simple, there is some strategical depth to it, despite the fact she can mash her way into insane front-loaded damage. Long story short, Linnea's situation is complicated, but in this Constellation Zero showcase video, I am going to reveal everything you need to know about this premier lunar crystallized support unit, including all of the team comps and loadouts I've tested, so that you can decide for yourself if she's worth pulling for. So, Linnea is one of those characters who fully scale with defense. Well, aside from her normal attacks, but they're useless anyway. Still, I will be mostly showcasing her with Slingshot, a 3-star bow, since it's a really good free-to-play choice. And there's only a few other options worth talking about, like the signature Golden Frostbound Oath, which improves her personal damage by roughly 30% or so, and then there's also Sacrificial Bow, which has its own weird but strong potential, which I'll talk about a bit later in the video. Besides that, she's equipped with the Obeyed artifact set, with Slingshot, Sands, Goblet, and Circlet have defense main stat, but if she's using Signature or Sacrificial Bow, then the Circlet will have critical rate main stat. And then finally, her skill and burst are raised to level 10, and of course, she is Constellation Zero. Oh, and yeah, keep in mind, footage shown here is from Creator Experience server, so final content is subject to change. Alright, so Linnea is first and foremost a support unit. She can reduce enemies' geo resistance by 30% basically all the time. Then 5% of her defense is converted as elemental mastery, which is usually about 120 to 170 EM, and gets applied either to her or active moon sign unit. And then she's also able to convert hydrocrystallize reaction into lunar crystallize. Plus she can boost that reaction's damage for everyone by up to 14%. And that's pretty much it, unless she's using her signature, which provides another team buff. But Linnea is quite simple in terms of her supportive capabilities, and they aren't that crazy when compared to someone like Shalonen. But as you saw from the intro, this cheerful Fae can deal over 1 million damage, which is pretty crazy. So let's talk about the most important part of her kit, the elemental skill. You see, inside Linnea's backpack lives her hilarious companion, Lumi. And whenever you use the skill, she is summoned to the field. Yes, I'm using a she pronoun because that's how in the livestream they refer to Lumi. Anyway, Lumi can be summoned in 2 different ways, by either just tapping the skill once or by mashing the skill button repeatedly, where she grows to a massive size and unleashes a big strike. Let's start with the tap mode because it has some peculiar stuff going on. When summoned, for the next 25 seconds, Lumi deals both Lunar Crystallize and regular Geo damage. The game calls this Super Power Form Lumi, and the pattern of her attacks will always be Lunar Crystallize hit, usually dealing more than 100k damage, followed by 2 Geo attacks scoring around 8k damage each. Then there's 2 more of the same Geo attacks, and then the pattern starts again from Lunar Crystallize hit. In typical rotations, you can expect Lumi to unleash around 3 to 4 Lunar Crystallize attacks and 6 double Geo attacks, which will also be around 6 Geo applications total. However, there is a catch. So in order for Lumi to do that Lunar Crystallize attack, Moondrifts need to be present, which only appear after causing Lunar Crystallize reaction. So as you can see from this comparison, if Linnea summons Lumi when there are no Moondrifts present, then Lumi first does 2 Geo hits, and then after Moondrifts appear, she smacks the enemy with Lunar Crystallize attack. Whereas on the right side, I just did 1 quick normal hit with Ningguang on an enemy with Hydro Aura to summon Moondrifts, and then when I swapped to Linnea and tap skill, Lumi immediately went for Lunar Crystallize attack. And while this might not seem like a big deal, using Linnea's tap skill without Moondrifts present at the beginning can lead to a pretty noticeable DPS loss, especially since most team rotations are quite short with Linnea, and those Lunar Crystallize hits from Lumi are unleashed roughly every 4 seconds or so. So yeah, I highly recommend to set up the Moondrifts on the field before using Linnea's tap skill. As a reminder, Moondrifts appear when anyone in the team applies Geo on Hydro, and then every 3 Geo applications, Moondrifts release 3 Lunar Crystallize attacks. But with Bina's burst active, there's 33% chance each one can cause additional hit. But let's talk about the other skill mode, the one where by mashing the skill button, Lumi grows exponentially and delivers 1 devastating Lunar Crystallize hit. The AoE is pretty huge here, and even without any buffs, it's like 270k damage or so with Slingshot. Literally one-shots the poor Regivine. Like, jeez, this is so ridiculous. So if we move to the next boss and assume Linnea utilizes some buffing, like let's say we use her right after C6 Goro's buffs, then the skill Mash can deal upwards to 600k damage, and Dubai doesn't even have enough time to finish off the boss. It just dies almost immediately. And you know what? If we give Linnea C6 Itlua buffs, now she hits for 720k damage, literally leaving the boss on 1 HP. But if we upgrade to signature weapon, then she can deal around 965k damage, immediately ending the Dorito. So yeah, this skill is ridiculous. All the damage gets front-loaded into this one big hit because afterwards, Lumi only deals those 2 Geo attacks every 4 seconds, and in typical rotations, Lumi will deal around 3 double Geo attacks and apply Geo 3 times. Keep in mind, the game calls this skill Mash attack ultimate power form, and then after, Lumi reverts back to standard power form, only inflicting those 2 regular Geo hits, so she won't do any more extra lunar crystallized attacks. It's also funny how the forms are differentiated. Ultimate is when Lumi grows big when mashing skill, Super is when the star glows on Lumi's head from tap mode, and Standard is when the star doesn't glow on her head. She's just so cute, I can't even. But the big question is, which one is better to use? Tap or mash the skill? Honestly, if we look at the multipliers, assuming Lumi can do that lunar crystallized hit 4 times per rotation in tap mode, it actually ends up as exact motion value as the one when you mash the skill. But there are some key differences. The biggest one being that tap mode allows Lumi to apply more Geo, which means more contribution towards the actual lunar crystallized reaction. The on-field time is also shorter, takes less than a second to tap the skill and swap out, whereas you need to spend around 2 or maybe even 2.5 seconds when mashing. And remember, these multipliers are special. They gain the following benefits here, the 2 most crucial ones being these lunar crystallized attacks ignore enemies' defense and have a secret 1.6 multiplier built in. Still, I would say as a general tip, if you use Linnea in teams where moondrifts are not present when you swap to her, then just mash the skill, since it doesn't require moondrifts to be present. Otherwise, tap the skill if your team already set up moondrifts. But honestly, I really like to mash the skill and end fights early because the amount of front-loaded damage is quite insane, especially considering some units like Goro, whose skill only buffs on-field unit. So Linnea won't benefit from his buffs when she goes off-field during tap mode. Plus, it's just really fun to use it. Now, there are also a few unique things to consider when mashing the skill. First one would be the Obeyed Artifacts set. The 4-set bonus is usually utilized by off-field units. However, that last part does say that the 60% lunar damage boost disappears 3 seconds after the unit is on field. And luckily enough, if you immediately swap and start mashing the skill, that gives enough time for Lumi to use that buff before it disappears. But if you wait for even a second too long, then she won't gain it. And then there's also Sacrificial Bow. What's better than 1 big hit? 2 big hits, of course. However, the bow's passive does not come into effect until Lumi deals regular Geo damage. It seems like the big lunar crystallized hit is not considered to be skill damage, which the bow requires to trigger its passive. So in reality, what happens is that Lumi smacks the enemy initially, then you wait for her to do regular Geo damage, which then forces the skill to reset, and then you can finally mash the skill button again. This ends up costing like 6 seconds of field time, and even though I was able to finish off the fatty here, it's just not a sustainable weapon to use when Linnea is acting as a support in teams, since she will steal all that buff uptime that otherwise could go to Dubai or other main DPS units. However, it is a fun weapon to use, especially if you want to spend more time on field with Linnea and Lumi. Finally, this leaves us with the burst, and it's really simple. It costs 60 energy, and when casted, Linnea heals the whole team once, and then for the next 12 seconds, every second the active unit receives healing. With her free-to-play slingshot build, team-wide heal restores around 9,350 HP, and then the healing tick is around 1,870 HP, which happens 12 times, and in total, she can restore around 32,000 HP, so a pretty decent way to keep the team alive. But this burst is really situational, and there's no point building energy recharge for Linnea. It's just not that crucial to use it every rotation. The burst also has one final trick up its sleeve. It resets Lumi's duration, but it's pretty meh, since for example, after mashing the skill, Lumi goes into standard form to deal those Geo hits slowly, and then if I use the burst afterwards, her ultimate form does not show up again. It just resets her standard form duration. So yeah, pretty lackluster, and even for tap skill, it's not that great, since realistically speaking, in most rotations, Lumi still ends up dealing around 4 lunar crystallized hits total at best. But yeah, that's Linnea and Lumi for you guys. I don't know about you, but Lumi is like my favorite companion in Genshin. I just lose my shit when I see Lumi climbing up the Dorito and bonking its head. I also forgot to mention this, but the exploration skill is pretty crazy. Basically, Linnea's charge attacks can mark ore sites, and Lumi shows up, destroys all ores in one hit, and sucks up the contents. Sometimes she doesn't absorb everything, as you can see here, but it's still quite a reliable way to quickly mine everything. The description mentions there's a cooldown for mining, but I haven't noticed it after actively mining for like 20 minutes. However, you can also catch certain types of animals with Linnea's charge shot as well. This acts exactly as the net gadget, and I caught like 8 or so animals. Some of them sadly didn't survive, so you can't catch every type, and there is a weekly cooldown, but I didn't hit it yet, so I'm not sure at how many animals it caps out. Anyway, I've spent enough time yapping about her kit. Now let's take a look at some of the teams. I think it's very important to first acknowledge one important detail when I discuss Linnea's teams. I am of course referring to Columbina, or should I say Binea. That's right, previously we had Binefa, now we have Binea. Sometimes you can use all three of them, so Binefea? I have no idea what to call all three of them together, but luckily, most teams will only utilize Binea core. And I will showcase a lot of teams utilizing Binea, but I will also talk about some non-Columbina teams too. Still, immediately, I can tell you now that if you go for a team such as Bina, Linnea, C6 Itlua, or C6 Goro, and Zibai, this team has basically the highest DPS potential in the entire game. Like, no joke, it absolutely wrecks everything. And while I don't have access to the dummy from Miliastra, I tried my best to count all the damage numbers, like a balding man in his 30s would do, and yeah, except for C6 Itlua or Goro, everyone else is C0 with either a 4-star or 3-star weapon equipped, and this still allows the team to reach around 160 to 170k DPS, and I am talking about no signatures or extra constellations. But keep in mind, right now, because there are only few of us creators calculating these comparisons, I suggest take everything we say with some grain of salt, but overall, it seems like Linnea helps improve Zibai's team by about 20 to 25% in overall DPS. But we all knew this would happen. And honestly, I was more interested to see how much Linnea helps lift other Geo units out of the gutter. And good news are, she is quite the godsend. For example, C6 Noelle in a team with Farina and Binea feels really nice, since Noelle first of all applies a ton of Geo, hence why Farina is there to help keep Hydro Aura on the enemies. Without additional Hydro unit, Bina's application is not enough. But otherwise, this was one of my favorite teams to use in the Abyss. Although, to be fair, this upcoming cycle does improve lunar crystallized damage by 75%, and enemies here are specifically designed to be punched around by Geo teams. Nonetheless, outside Abyss, even in Stygian, these Binea core teams felt great, even if the point of Stygian is to shill latest units. Still, besides Noelle, I also tried out Ito, who kind of felt slightly better since he actually deals a lot more personal damage compared to Noelle, and you don't need to bring another Hydro unit, so someone like Goro can be utilized instead, and this is where mashing Linnea's skill is also perfectly fine. Then there's also Navia, and out of the three, I would say she's the strongest one here, although again, you need to bring more Hydro applications, so Farina works there quite well, although I will say Navia's rotations are a bit awkward since you want to use her burst and then swap out and do other unit setup, and also, compared to Noelle who has a shield or big resistance interruption that Ito gains, Navia can get knocked around a bit if enemies are aggressive. But I think the most surprising of the bunch was Ningguang. Oh man, Ningguang. I'm gonna be honest guys, I think the last time I played her was like a few years ago, so I am super rusty with my knowledge of how to best utilize her kit, but even then, she applies a ton of Geo from her entire kit. So second Hydro unit is a must, and I don't know, she felt quite fun to use. And now I am considering becoming Ningguang main in 2026, I know. By the way, Noelle, Ito, Navia, and Ningguang were using the Sky set since I would usually put a bait both on Bina and Linnea, and then the other units such as Farina or Goro or Itlua would be using the Serenade set. So if you have these sets farmed up, it feels pretty great to use something like Sky set on old units. Otherwise, if we go back to Zibai teams, if you don't have C6 Goro or Itlua, but pulled for someone like Chiori, she's also pretty good, and it's also interesting how well her skill works, since usually you want to swap from Chiori to Linnea, and since you're already mashing the skill during Chiori's swap ability, that mashing carries over onto Linnea's skill. I feel like maybe that's why developers decided to make you mash instead of holding the skill for Linnea. And yeah, then, as I've mentioned before, you can use Linnea with Sacrificial Bow to act as a pseudo on-field unit, which is pretty funny to see when she hits for over 1,000,000 damage when combining both mashed lunar crystallized hits from Lumi. But without additional constellations outside this currently buffed Abyss cycle, it probably won't be as great. Now, you might be wondering, is Binea Core better than Binefa? Well, to be honest, not really. Binea is a lot more restrictive. Essentially, if you use this duo, the other two units need to be Hydro and Geo to achieve the best potential. Whereas with Binefa, there's a lot more flexibility. I mean, sure, you could go for something like Arlecchino or Hu Tao and Yelan with Binea, but the thing is, Linnea's second passive provides that EM boost only to on-field moon sign units. If it's not a moon sign unit, then Linnea when she's off-field just simply gains that EM buff, which means Arlecchino or Hu Tao ends up missing out on that crucial 150 EM boost, and their vapes end up quite mid. But ignoring that interaction, just use Binea with any combination of Hydra and Geo. You could even go for some classic tall glass of water Nuvelette gameplay, even if his contribution will be questionable, and if he is C0, then use someone like Kazuha to create 3 different reactions and help him achieve all 3 draconic seals. But if he's C1, then obviously someone like Shilonen is a better choice. Still, outside of teams that focus on lunar crystallized reaction damage, Linnea can work quite well with Nefer's meta team comp consisting of Lauma and Bina. Usually you would use someone like C6 Sucrose as the last support, and it is still the best option to go for if you want to squeeze out the best damage possible, but the DPS loss is not that big compared to using Linnea instead of Sucrose. Except Linnea also provides healing, which is a huge boon to have in Nefer teams, if your Lauma is not C1, because man oh man, I just hate how squishy Nefer is without any sustain. Finally, there is one big thing we need to talk about. What if you don't have Columbina on your account? Well, the alternatives are basically Furina, Kokomi, Yelan, Xingqiu, and Aino, I believe. Out of them all, if you have C6 Aino, she not only helps boost lunar crystallized damage, but if you don't use another moon sign unit, then Linnea's first passive also becomes much worse, since she needs Ascendant Gleam State for the team to have in order to go from minus 15% to minus 30% geo resistance shred. Although I will say that when I was using Aino, her typical restrictive problems showed up, biggest one being the circle you need to fight inside. And of course, Aino's damage contribution is non-existent compared to Bina's strong sub DPS. And more importantly, Bina also allows lunar crystallized reaction to score more hits with her burst. So overall, I would say Linnea without Columbina feels kinda scuffed. It's not the worst thing in the world, but you will be missing out on a lot of synergy and damage without Bina. And for Zibai teams especially, I would prioritize obtaining Bina first, then try and get Linnea. Or, you know, pull for Linnea now, and if you don't have Bina, save up enough Primos until her next rerun. Don't get me wrong though, Zibai is still really good even with Aino, C6 Itlua, or C6 Goro and Linnea, but it's quite far behind in terms of max potential without Bina. And then if you go for something like Aino plus Linnea duo, perhaps we can call it Ainea? Yeah, well, the other 2 units in free-to-play team could be Itlua and Goro, but I only recommend doing this if they are both C6. Otherwise, bringing some Hydro and another Geo unit can be decent, but obviously, we're talking about a much less powerful team archetype when compared to previous options I've showcased. Also, you might be wondering why I didn't mention the Osmanthus Wine guy. And the truth is, while Zhongli's big, long, and strong pillars help cause a lot of lunar crystallized reactions, especially if you summon 2 of them if he is C1, but just like non-Hexarai Albedo, they get destroyed quite quickly by most big bosses. So if you can keep the pillars alive and enemies stay close around them, then he is quite a funny man to include in teams and watch everyone perish from onslaught of lunar crystallized reactions. So what do I think about Linnea? Well, all I can say is that I love Lumi so much. She's my favorite mascot in Genshin. She's cute, silly, and has adorable sound effects. Reminds me of this old Klonoa game on PS2. Otherwise, yeah, if you have Bina and Zibai in either C6 Goro or C6 Itlua, getting Linnea means achieving new power level, I guess. But besides the numbers, I do like the fact there is some strategical depth when it comes to deciding if you want to use the tap or mash version of the skill. Right now, I am just, as Frank says it, keep mashing it. I can't help it, guys. I just like seeing that big number pop up. Also, I didn't really get too much into the details, but something like Husk Artifact set on Linnea is also fine, and there's definitely other weapon options worth considering, like Snare Hook or some of the 5-star stat sticks, but all of this and more I will cover when I release Linnea's guide video, which you can expect to see the moment the Luna 6 update drops. Overall, Linnea definitely helped Geo enter era of dominance, and even old and decrepit units such as Ningguang and Noelle get to live in the spotlight for a moment. But as I said, Linnea obviously becomes much more scary when she's together with Columbina, so keep that in mind. Anyway, thanks for watching the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, bye bye!